Welcome back to Beauty Marks Podcast, a space where we embrace marks acquired through our journey. My name is Elizabeth Savion, and I am your host of this podcast. Welcome. If you've never been here, it's your first time. Thank you so much for joining me on this week's episode. This topic on this week's episode is important because it's something that's not talked about in the world that we're living in, where people do get divorces, go through depression, go through hard struggles in life. And so this week's guest really shares her own story and just encourages someone today. So let's just get right into it. Today, I'm very excited to have a special guest that honestly, I feel like she's one of my biggest supporters on this podcast, but also I've known her for many years. We've done Bible study together. We went to youth group together, young adults, and she's amazing. The work that she does with youth and just in church and in UCF. And so welcome to Beauty Marks Podcast, Keycha. How are you today?
I am doing well, Elizabeth. I'm really excited to be here. I am honored to be here to be on this podcast. I am your biggest fan. I listen to your podcast faithfully every week. And so I'm truly humbled to have the opportunity to share my story today.
Yes, honestly, she's always like my hype girl, and I really appreciate it. Honestly, it's always the day ones that are like
Of course, yes, always.
I appreciate.
You know how I love your family. I think you guys are incredible, like family #goals.
You're so sweet.
So I'm really excited. This is gonna be great.
Yeah. So for those that don't know you, can you share a little bit about what you're passionate about and a little bit about yourself?
Yes. So I'm passionate about God. I'm passionate about mental health advocacy. I previously I was a victim advocate. So definitely I'm all about, women overcoming difficult life circumstances and kind of like rising above. I have a blog, Living Above the Stigma, which specifically focuses on individuals who live with mental illness. So I'm really passionate about mental health awareness, education. I work in education. I absolutely love it. And I'm very passionate about the youth. So I truly believe that they are our world changers. And I just love being able to work with younger people who teach me so much. I think that as a society, we have a hard time like learning from those who are younger. And for me personally, it has been like my biggest blessing. I feel like I learn more from my 6-year-old, than I do from anyone else. And so that's what I'm passionate about. I'm just kind of passionate about helping people kind of like move through life and moments.
Yeah. I love when you did the episodes with your girls of like talking about kind of your childhood, like and kind of generational and just sharing with them. Like, I feel like you talk about that a lot, even with your kids, like they're very aware of like their emotions of what's going on. And I really admire that because I always wondered how, as like a parent, you can kind of instill that in a young age with them.
Honestly, the reason that I am very open with them about their emotions and their mental health and everything is because that's something that I wish I had growing up. So for me, when I became a parent, I was told I couldn't have children. And so when I was pregnant, I was like, oh my gosh, like I wasn't prepared for this. And so I made it kind of like my life mission to make sure that they were aware, very self-aware at a young age, because I feel like that's what, as a society, we lack a lot of times, self-awareness. I feel like if you're self-aware and you can communicate what you are feeling from your perspective, of course, like you're able to communicate better and you're able to have healthier relationships. And so that's something that when I became a mom, from going from, I'm not going to be a mom to a mom, that's something that was a priority for me. And I'm grateful that my husband also had that same mindset of like, no, we're going to talk to them about these things now so that they're hearing it from people that don't have their best interest. So.
Yeah. I love that. You're a great mom. And I love your family pictures. I feel like you have a theme for like every month. Like you guys always take family pictures and I love them so much. So I
Thank
admire
you.
that. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about kind of where that stems from of how you didn't have that growing up. So what was your upbringing like? And a little bit, so we're going to get a little bit into your story.
Yeah, so like my childhood, so I am the youngest of three. I was, I moved from Puerto Rico. Me, my brother, and my mom moved from Puerto Rico when I was 6 years old, here to Florida. And after my parents were divorced, I am the youngest, like I mentioned, but my sister is my half sister. And so it was my mom's second divorce. And so I came from my childhood was a little bit chaotic in the sense that there was a lot of changes, there was a lot of uncertainty, and there was not room to have those conversations of like why things were happening just because of the change and just location. It's very hard. You've talked about in previous podcasts about like you guys moving and everything, and the same for us. We moved here and we lived in Kissimmee for a little bit, and then we moved to Ponciana, and then we moved to the west side, and so there was just like a lot of changes. And so while I was trying to learn a new language, make new friends, I missed my dad that was back in PR, and my brother also, acclimating to America and everything. And there was a lot of uncertainty and a lot of things that weren't spoken about. There was a lot of yelling.
Mm.
So, and kind of suppressing of emotions for the sake of keeping the peace, which was a little bit difficult, because I felt that I couldn't really express myself in order not to make anyone feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so kind of I played the happy, like, the entertainer of the family a lot of times. Like, I was a happy child. I was a positive child. Nothing bothered me. While I feel like in the inside, there was a lot of questions and a lot of things that weren't being answered. And so there was a lot of turmoil going on while I was like kind of putting this face for the world to see. And so, yeah, I would say that my childhood there was a lot of faking, if I'm going to be honest. There was a lot of pretending that things were good when the reality is that in the deep of it, like it wasn't. There was a lot of turmoil.
Yeah, no, because you said that you were moving, you had just gone through your parents' divorce, like adapting and changing to a new place, like all of those all happening at the same time. And you were very young, right? You were in elementary or middle school?
I was in elementary. I was 6 years old. So yeah.
Gotcha. Wow. And so how was it when you first moved here to like adapt? So like were you very involved? Were you like very expressive? Like what really changed in your childhood that you would say was like a pivotal moment for you?
So when we moved here, my mom had like one friend, and then she made like a neighbor friend and things like that. And I feel like those neighbor friends, like they were older, they were teens. And so like I feel like I was exposed to things that I probably should have been exposed to at a young age. And then when I was 8 years old, my mom got remarried to a man, and he was a father of five daughters. And we moved from where we were at. We moved kind of like remote. We moved to like the deep part of Poinciana. It was like at that point, literally all that there was like orange trees, literally.
Mm-hmm.
And like a gas station, things like that. So it was I was very social. I was always very social. I was in choir and like the spelling bee and things like that. Like I was always like trying to connect. But at home, um, it was my mom seemed very happy. She was very happy. She's like, that's my Prince Charming and everything. And he seemed like a very nice guy. But when I was 9 years old, he molested me while I was sleeping, and so that kind of changed me. That changed my personality, and that was definitely a traumatic moment in my life. And that happened for about 3 years. And so during that time, there was again a lot of hiding, a lot of secrecy, because I didn't tell anyone. I finally did tell someone. My by this time, I had family members that have moved also to Florida. So my mom was basically the pioneer that like moved herself. And then my grandma came, and then my aunts and uncles came and everything from Puerto Rico. So at this point, like at least I have my family and things like that. So I kind of confess, I will never forget, because it was in my room, and I remember being in my room, like in my in my closet. I would like write notes and like the boys I liked and all that. And I remember I was there, and I was like, I have to tell you something. And I told her, and I kind of swore her to secrecy. And now, right at my age, I'm like, man, that's a very heavy thing to have someone promise not to say anything about. But like I said, I didn't want my mom to be divorced again. I did not want to hurt her. And I didn't know if she would believe me. So I kept that a secret for a long time. And so, yeah, I think that was the pivotal moment in childhood where.
So what did she find out? Like, did she divorce him?
So at the age of 13, like I was rebelling a lot. I went from like being like this happy, super happy child to like now like being super disrespectful. I'll be honest. Like I was disrespectful. Like I, would talk back. I just didn't want to ever be home. My friends were not the best influence at that time. I just started hanging out with the wrong crowd. And my mom, I was being disrespectful to my stepdad. And so my mom kicked me out of my home. And so when that happened, because she would ask me, and I was like, nothing, I kind of like will brush it off. Like there's nothing going on. And then when that happened, I yelled it out. Like I was like, the reason I'm like this is because this person did this.
Oh, wow.
So it was like literally like a ticking time bomb, and exploded, and that like the shock waves were, it was a lot. And so when that happened, there was a lot of questions. Unfortunately, my confidant got in trouble for not saying something. Like whoopings were given Hispanic. So
yeah, that's a lot of.
¿Cómo tú no dijiste? Yeah, like ¿cómo tú no dijiste qué estaba pasando? So like it was how the reaction was not what I expected. It was not what I expected. And I also now looking back, like I probably shouldn't have done it the way I did, because obviously like already emotions were high because I was being kicked out of my home. And then like
you were like in the climate, you were like dropping the mic. You're like, I'm done. Here's why, and that's it. I mean, but you were so young too, though, like when that all things happen. So it's like in that time, it's like, what can someone expect of you to like, if you were never given like a voice, and you were never given kind of like to connect with your emotions or like understand what you were feeling or like being heard. It's kind of like, it's a hard place. And especially in our Latino cultures, like it is kind of like that, like it's so extra, like elevated emotions on certain topics. And then with certain topics, you either just don't talk about them, or it's, you do talk about them, it's not a safe space. Like, like kind of how the reaction that you maybe expected wasn't what you thought, so
exactly.
yeah, that's a lot to deal with at that age. Like,
yeah, it was a lot.
How did that affect you, would you say, as like then in relationships and kind of getting into, like in that rebelling stage, as you said?
I think that at that point, it was because at the beginning I wasn't believed. It made me question my character. It made me question who I was, my worth. It made me feel like I always had to like over explain myself for everything. It's something that I even struggle with right now. I'm someone like, my husband like jokes, he's like, you have such a guilty like conscience. Like you're always like things are not that big of a deal. Like you overanalyze. And I through therapy and everything, like I realized like that's where it stems from, because like I feel like I was interrogated, like to see if there was like cracks in my story, you know? So I literally felt like I was interrogated, because I was interrogated by, you know, my mom, I was interrogated by my grandma, like then like other family members. It was just like a lot. And so and I got into relationships, I feel like I just used relationships as an escape to what was going on at home. You know, I used feeling like that attention. You know, I don't know, I'm sure you've heard this before, but when something is taken away from you, and like for me, I felt like my innocence was taken away from me, then you kind of give it for free. How I felt. I felt like if if it has been taken from me, then I might as well have control who gets it. And at least I have power in that, if that makes sense. Like, well, I'm desired. And so what am I going to do with that? And I felt like that was the power that I used when it came to relationships, like that desirability, and that like, oh, you know, this is what I can offer you. And like, are you really gonna, you know, like leave this kind of thing? And it was just like super toxic. Let's be real, super toxic. But I did with what I knew, right? Like that's kind of what I knew. That's what was kind of being fed to me. And so that's what I believed. And so that guided a lot of my relationships, which led me to, you know, my first marriage.
So you got married at what age?
I was 21 years old.
Gotcha. And was it like your high school sweetheart? Like, was it in school? Like, how did that happen?
So my high school sweetheart, we broke up, and I decided it would be a great idea to go to the military. Don't listeners, don't do that.
You're like going through it. I'm gonna go to the military.
Right.
Hey.
Right. So I was heartbroken, and a recruiter, the recruiter of the person that I was dating at the time, like was like, hey, you could go to the military and it will pay for school. And I come from middle class. And like we couldn't afford college, and a goal for me was college. And so it was so, recruiters are very good at their job. And so I was like, okay, fine. And because I was so heartbroken, again, I was running away. I ran away from home. And I ran into the military, and that is where I met my ex-husband in the military during training.
Did you expect to be married? Because I know that's kind of like a cliche. That's kind of like a thing that it's like, if you go to the military, you get married. So was that like that for you? Or like, were you like, no, I want to be married. I want to be in love. Like, I'm in love.
I think it was a mix of both. I think it was a fact that, I finally spoke up about what happened to me with my stepdad. I started going to church, and my healing began for that. But then, like I said, I started like living promiscuous. I was very promiscuous and kind of walked away from my faith. And so when I went to the military, I actually was in the choir in the military, and I would go to like Sunday service and everything. And so at that point, it was a lot of like, oh man, like I'm doing these things. It's not right. I'm not living right. And so what about if I die and I'm living in sin? And so like all the I already got disappointed. I felt like my family for going to the military, because they were like, how do you go from being in theater and dance to the military? Like, what? I just felt like I wanted to kind of have something for them to be proud of. And so I thought marriage would do that, especially because, to answer your question, I was medically discharged. So I actually got hurt while in the military. And so I was medically discharged. So again, I felt like a failure. And I felt like I had to act like I came feeling ashamed.
Mm.
And like I had to answer so many questions about what happened there. And unfortunately, while I was in there, I was sexually abused. And so having to talk about the fact that I was medically discharged on top of the fact that I had gone through sexual trauma, just it wasn't it, you know. And I met when I met him, you know, he wasn't Hispanic. So there was a lot of cultural differences.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, a different cultural difference, maybe my life will turn out different. I'm gonna be honest, like I feel like if it's gonna turn out different, you know, I've tried I tried from this and it hasn't worked here. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's a little different. Y'all forgive me, I was young. Okay, I was 18 years old,
No,
so
girl, this is a judge-free zone.
so you know, we started dating. He lived in Kansas. I came back obviously to Florida. I was after being medically discharged. I started therapy, physical therapy because I was injured. I also went to counseling because it was kind of part of it. Because it was very hard for me to be discharged. Like I really try to fight the system. Like I was like, no, I can change this MOS and I can do this job,
Mm-hmm.
do a sit down job. And, you know, I really did not want to have to go back home with nothing to show for it. So me and him had like kind of broken up. And then we connected via, not Facebook, MySpace. If you guys
Those
MySpace.
days. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. We reconnected via MySpace and he was in Kansas and I was in Florida and he was about to deploy. So he proposed to me right before he deployed. So yeah, I'm sure you guys have heard that story before. So yeah, so he proposed. It was literally in a hotel room, nothing romantic whatsoever about it. Like in a hotel room, he just took it out of his pocket and he's like, marry me. So yeah.
Yes. Your 21-year-old self was so happy.
Exactly. I was like, well, at that point, I was like 19 or 20. So I was like,
Mhm.
oh, yeah, you know, like
Yeah.
you're over here serving your country and you want to marry me, you know, all those say to ourselves to kind of justify rash decisions. So yeah, that was a very rash.
Mhm. Did you feel like that? So were there red flags in the relationship, or like were you guys a healthy relationship?
There was definitely red flags. There was definitely infidelity. There was definitely I felt that it was just kind of like his ignorance, just being from where he was, like a small town in Michigan. Like I thought, like, oh, it's just a big, you know, it's not a big deal. Boys will be boys type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so he would say certain things. I remember he said, like, I would never date a Puerto Rican. And I feel like that was a challenge for me. And I'm like, oh, excuse me, you know, like that's literally the first sentence he ever said to me, which I'm like, how did I marry a man who say that? But anyways,
Wow.
you live and you learn. So
Mm-hmm.
there was definitely red flags. I remember he got in a fight with a friend of mine in the military because he said something to me while me and him were together, and like it literally turned into a brawl. So like 100% red flags. Like he had a temper and things like that. And he really, really wouldn't talk to me about his past too much. So I knew that there was something that wasn't right, but at that time, I wasn't right either. So it's kind of like, oh, well, we will grow together, you know,
Of course.
like the song says. And so there was a lot of red flags, but I think I wasn't healthy enough to recognize them at that time.
Yeah, which makes sense because we're like, I feel like my 19, 18-year-old self is so different from the one today. It's like your mind isn't even fully like developed of rational decisions. Especially
100%.
in relationships. I feel like most women can agree, and even on this podcast that I've interviewed say it's like you just feel like when you're in love and you're just like nope, this is it, like no one understands your story, it's just us against the world, and you just go for it even though you see all the red flags. So how was it once you got married, and how long were you married for?
So he came back from Kosovo. Throughout the time I was like planning the wedding and everything. And we soon got married. When I was 21, a few months prior, I had a family member that was very close to pass away. And so I feel like I wasn't in the mental state to do it, but we just already had thrown a bunch of money in there. Again, not a reason to get married, but we got married very quickly. And on the day of our wedding, actually the day before our wedding, my grandma, such a sweetheart, she was like, you don't have to do this, in her like Spanish, like, she's Spanish and she's very like religious. She's like, tú no tienes que hacer esto. You don't have to do this. Like, the money doesn't matter. Like, you can walk away right now and we will support you. So for my grandma to say that, like, she's a very religious woman. Like, she believes in like, being married if you're gonna live together. Because at that time we lived together because he moved from Texas over here and we got an apartment. And even before that, the priest kind of wouldn't marry us because we had to do premarital counseling because we got married through a Catholic church. And during that time, I let the priest know my concerns because I was low-key afraid for my life. There were some things, there was some verbal abuse and things like that. And he told me he couldn't marry me. And so I told him about it. Like, I went back to him and let him know, hey, the priest says he wouldn't marry us, but maybe we can just get married by like just a regular person. Like, it's not a big deal. And he basically had me like write a letter saying that I had cold feet and like basically had me beg the priest to marry us, which he did.
Mom.
Oh, even before my grandma, like the priest himself, I felt like literally God, right? For those who are listening who are Catholic, right? Like God himself told me that they would marry me.
It's like, Lord, tell me a sign. It's like, I will send a one and tell you not to marry.
And he surely did. He surely did. And then the day of the wedding, his mother, so my ex-husband's mother, came up to me like while we were doing the prayer and told me like, you don't have to do this. You look very nervous. You're trembling. Like, you don't have to do this. Ladies and gentlemen, I did. I got married. And the night of our wedding, he threw the ring when I went to pick him up because he decided to spend time with his friends that came from Michigan. And when I got to the apartment, because he wasn't coming to like the hotel room, like I went to visit him. It was like 2 a.m. and he like threw the ring at like my face and like was super drunk. And let's just say our honeymoon was not the best. I actually didn't see him on our honeymoon night. So if it was already bad, I think it got just extremely worse once we said I do. So.
Wow. And so how did it go from there? Like, were you hoping that, you guys are gonna, have a healthy relationship, or did you feel like living with him and seeing those things kind of made it worse?
For me, I definitely tried. I am a Christian woman. So to me, it's like, well, I said I do. Like, I can't get an annulment. There's not such thing in Florida. So I was like, no, we're going to make this work. Of course, he was a master manipulator. He, made a great gesture and like, we went on a cruise and then he took me out of town. And like, every time he would do something like, whether it was like push me or curse me out or like, I would catch him watching pornography or, things that was just like no's for me. Like, he would just make a grand gesture and kind of like be like, I will never do this again. And I love you so much. And you're my princess and you're this. And so like, he kept on kind of manipulating me. And to be honest, as I was thinking about today, I realized that the reason I feel like I was conditioned that way, because part of the reason that I didn't tell my mom about the abuse as a child is because my stepdad at the time, the next day after he did it, he like, we were picking up my mom in his truck and it was just me and him. My brother stayed home and he bought me a VCR. And he kind of tried to excuse what he did by saying that he was dreaming of a woman and I just happened to be next to him and that it would never happen again. And like, if we can just kind of keep this between us. And he gave me a VCR. And as a 9-year-old, I'm confused. I have no idea what happened. But I'm getting a VCR. Okay, so he loves me. He says he's sorry. You know, and he was like, you don't want to hurt your mom. You don't want to break her heart. And so, you know, I noticed that that's the same thing that was happening with my husband, you know, when I was 21, that every time he would do something bad, he would kind of buy me. And I think at that point, I felt like used goods. And so I felt that I had a price, if that makes sense. So I kept on forgiving it while going into a very deep depression, being diagnosed with mental illness, you know, almost committing suicide. I was just in a very dark place because I felt like a prisoner. Like, you know, like I felt like I married him to not be imprisoned. And then here I was once again, like having to put up a front. He would call me like his trophy wife. So like he would only like take me out like for like company parties or like, you know, things that would benefit him for his career. And outside of that, like he would just be like 18 hours playing video games.
Oh, wow.
Watching porn or whatever. So it was just like not a good, it was a lot of hiding from me. It was a lot of pretending. During my marriage, we were married for 2.5 years. And together for 4.5. And it was a lot of excusing behaviors, excusing abuse. And it was painful. It was very, very painful, but there was like a lot of shame attached to it. So I was like, I'll do therapy. I'll start going to church. I'll start, you know, like at the feet of the Father, right? Like I'm told, like, you know, don't give up on your marriage, while I was like getting sexually abused at home. Like there is such thing as like marital rape, and like this was happening. And I had to like put on a face once again. Like I had to like pretend that everything was fine, nothing is wrong. I started being part of a church and like I got really connected there, but again, he wasn't part of it at all. And when he was, you know, people could tell that there was something off. So once again, I was hiding, I was keeping secrets. And I was honestly, I felt like I was slowly dying inside as I stayed in that marriage. I'm not going to say that there wasn't any happy moments, because there definitely was. There were. I don't think no one can ever say like there was never any happy moments, you know. I would have married him if there was. But I felt like the happy moments were because of bad behavior. So like it was like, you know, when a dog, like you feed it a treat after you beat it. Like I felt like that's how it was for me for the time that I was with him.
Yeah, it's like a cycle. That's like the cycle of abuse, that like you have really, really high highs and like really, really low lows. So it's like extreme. So it's like you fight and it's like the makeup is amazing. Like then it's like amazing for a few days. And it's like another fight or another issue, then it's like terrible. And then like starts, it's like a cycle, but you're like addicted because it's like a trauma it's a trauma bond. Like you're addicted to the high and the feelings that it gives you of like the really, really good and then the really, really bad. And I'm sure that like I've learned this over the years that it's like you can never say like when someone's like, why didn't you get out? Like, you know, if it was so bad, why didn't you get out? Like, I feel like until you're actually in those situations, you will understand. And even how you were saying, so like that, imagine in a dating relationship, I can't imagine being married. Like when you're married, especially being raised in a place where like people tell you like marriage is a no option, like you just don't do it, and you already have that in your head, plus you're feeling like, you know, because of your past, you kind of feel like, well, maybe this is love, like maybe this is how it's supposed to be for me. And then, you know, so like now adding up like your story, like, you know, how did you feel like when people around you were telling you like, okay, like divorce isn't an option, but like you were kind of feeling like this is like I'm miserable in this. Like how did that work out for you? Did you reach out for help, or like did you get other people involved in that process?
Yeah. So, I'm thankful that I have a very supportive mom. Like my mom is my best friend. And, I talked to her about what was going on. I also, started going to therapy because I was part of like, now being a veteran that I, got therapy services and doing like a physical and everything. The doctor was concerned about my health. And he noticed some things and he was like, I think I think you need to talk to a therapist about this. And so when I shared what the doctors found during my physical, like the doctor was like, I think that you're in danger of your life and we need to talk about an exit plan. Like how can you safely exit? And so at that time, I talked to the leader of my small group at the time of my church, and I talked to some friends that I confided in, and I started the process,
Mm-hmm.
and I got separated, and then I went and I got my things while he was at work from the house. Literally, I only took my clothes, my makeup, and the bed that I brought into the home. Like I left everything else because we had bought a home, a new car that it was for him, but it was under my name and his name. And I left it all behind because it wasn't worth my life. And at that point, you know, he had used my mental illness and I used my conditions, my physical conditions to get out of the military himself. So he was also a veteran. And so, but he had gone through a lot of traumatic things being in the military. And so I feel like a lot of it had to do with PTSD. And like I was in fear of my life because he would sleep with like, on a gun, like a revolver, like under his bed and things like that. And like all these things. And so I was very fearful.
Mm-hmm.
And he would kind of he would force himself upon me. And like he thought that having a baby would fix it. And I would literally be praying to the Lord, like, God, if it is your will, okay, I'll accept it. It's like, but if you know that this man is going to hurt me or my child, please do not allow me to get pregnant. And so that's when I went to get the physical, and I was told that I couldn't have children because of the trauma that I had like endured.
Wow.
When I found that out, that was hard because he did not take that very well. And I feel like the abuse got worse. And so I walked away. He didn't know where I was staying. He didn't, like I was grateful. I had a very good job at the time. So I got my own apartment, and I just started over. He was stalking a lot of like my phone. He was stalking, like he had access to my emails and all these things. And so like he would reach out to people from the church to find out about me and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very scary for a long time. But thankfully that is over. And eventually like he got the hint and he stopped like bothering me and things like that. And so when I left in May. I put in for the divorce in July, and then it was finally finalized in September. So I feel like that was the longest year of my life because
Yeah.
I did not realize it took that long, especially because it was like he finally like gave in and he was like, listen, you want the divorce, I'll give you the divorce. And so like it wasn't even like a messy, like I said, I didn't ask for anything. So it was a dissolution of marriage. So I thought in a month I'm good. But no. It took a long time. So
And how was that for you once you got out of that? Because you said that you felt like a lot of shame towards that, but you knew that you needed to get out. So it was like, how was that for you? Kind of like recovering of being like, this is this is what I had to do. And at this point, how old were you?
So I was 23 years old. So I was 23 years old. And at that point, it was a relief, but I also went through the stages of grief because the reality is whether you are in a healthy relationship or not, it's still a bond that you have, right? As Christians, we say soul ties, right? So it was still a soul tie that I had. Mm-hmm. And so it was hard. I grieved it, the whole denial and then anger and justification. Like I went through that. Like I grieved the divorce. Mm-hmm. I also felt a lot of shame because once again, here I am thinking I'm doing something to make my family proud. And here I come back to you guys like divorced, So I just felt like a failure. I felt like the Samaritan woman, if I could describe myself with anyone, I felt like the Samaritan woman. I felt like, oh man, I'm repeating a generational curse because now I am part of the statistics. And in my family, in my mother's side, there is a history of divorce. And so there was a lot of shame and a lot of what people will say and a lot of like, I told you so's, which when you're in pain, and even if you guys are right, you don't want to hear that. You don't want to hear I told you so. And so it's very difficult because like I said earlier, like I was also diagnosed with a mental illness. So, I was dealing with that while trying to deal with the fact that I went from a 4.5-year relationship between marriage and dating to being on my own, to have to like fend for myself. Mm-hmm. So it was very difficult. It was a very difficult season, but I'm super grateful because God brought women into my life at that time that would be my tribe. And they truly helped me through that season of my life.
Wow. And those are the girls that I think I know, right?
Yes.
The group of girls. And then you guys are
those are my girls.
Yes. I love them. And it's amazing to see all of you guys have like your families now. And that's amazing. Those kind of like lifelong friendships.
Right. And I think that things like this test your friendships. I think it's that everyone can be in the happy moment. And like I said, like, and you know me, so I'm always like positive. I could be going through something terrible and I will be smiling. And it's hard to recognize real. You're going through a real situation. And for me, I felt that was very clear because during that time I needed clarity too regarding the church I was attending, regarding a lot of things. And so I asked God for clarity and he definitely gave it to me. And those girls, like, out of that group, I was the only one, maybe one other person was married or dating, but for the most part, most of them are single. Mm-hmm. And they stood by me. They never judged me. They were there for me. I never felt that I was less than because now I was a divorcee, like nothing like that. And then there was people that were in my life during that marriage that no longer are in my life. And I think it's because they couldn't handle the aftermath. Because after you get a divorce, there's going to be a lot of emotions. There's going to be a lot of like, oh, let's hang out. Let's, it's like you've been in prison. So now you're going to want to break free. And like, I feel like during that time, there's certain people that just, it was too much for them. Mm-hmm. And so that was an added rejection that I felt like, I felt abandoned even more because I'm like, I thought you guys were in it forever.
Mm-hmm.
God is so good. Like, he removed people from my life and then he added amazing people in my life, and they're still in my life now. So, I count it all as good. I count it all as a blessing. So,
Wow. Girl, honestly, thank you for sharing that part of your story. I know that there's listeners on this podcast that have been divorced at a young age, and of what they've shared with me and what I've heard is that it does feel like your whole life is like kind of like unraveling. Like it's like, wait, what? Like it's all like you thought this illusion of how your life would be, and then that happened, and so it's a loss. How you said you grieve the process and everything like that. How were you able to work through that, and kind of find hope in that? I mean, because now you're married, right? You have kids, so that's part of your story. But how did you not let it define your story?
I think that honestly, Lizzie, it helped that my relationship with God had been reignited. So I came back home, right? As we would say, like, I felt like during that season, I was depending on my own strength. And I was so focused on what people would say that I forgot what God says about me.
Mm-hmm.
So when I left that relationship, although I grieved it, and for those who are listening and are going through something or have been through something like this, like, it's okay to grieve it and it's okay to have emotions. Like, God has emotions. Like, we're not exempt from feeling. But my relationship with God, I was on fire for God. And I refused to go back to a place where I was so desperate that I wanted to end my life. Like, I just refused. Like, I refused to be there. Like, now I knew what I live for and that I had a purpose, and if that God allowed me to go through it, and if I survived it while other people that are in domestic violence situations don't, it's for a purpose. So I honestly just kept on. I got more involved in church. I, got involved in ministry. I, went to therapy very heavily, like on a weekly basis, to deal with everything, to understand, okay, so why did this happen? And all those things. And especially because, like I mentioned, like, I tried therapy, I tried everything. So it wasn't like I did not try. I want those who are listening to know, it's not that I did not try, it's that everything that I tried was unsuccessful. And at one point you have to realize, like, yes, Jesus, somewhere, I think it was Matthew or Luke or something, says that he hates divorce, right? And we know that, and a lot of people hold on to that in the Bible, right? Like, they hold on, like, well, it's in red caps, like it's in red letters. Jesus said it, so it's true, right? But let's look at that time period. Let's look at, what was going on at that time. And if you're only gonna base how you view life and how you view others on one verse, then you're doing it wrong, because there's also, the fact that in the word of God, it says that, your life is precious. And, like, above all else, like, like, if your life is at risk, and, like, when it comes to divorce, like, I had to ask my pastors, I had to ask people, like, did I make the right choice? And at the end of the day, there's 3 reasons, right, in the Bible, right, for those who believe in the word of God, like, and it's abuse, infidelity, and, neglect. So, like, they leave you. And I had all those things. So, you know what I mean? Like, all those things happened within my marriage. And so for that reason, I knew it's what had to be done, even though it would come with a lot of consequences, because it's not easy to start from scratch. It's not easy at all. My mom has been divorced a couple of times, and that's why to me, my mom is everything, because to have to start over is the most difficult thing to do. And on top of the judgment of people, because you go from living in a, 3-bedroom home, having newest car, like, everything looking all good. Oh, you're traveling, you're doing this, to, like, now you're struggling to get something in the fridge.
Yeah.
To the one who doesn't know the story, it's like, oh, you're silly, to the one that doesn't know that like my life was at risk. Wow. Mm-hmm. Good man. But I remember who I am in Christ. I am a king. You know, I deserve to be loved. I deserve to be respected, you know, and I am not defined by my mistakes. I'm not defined by my choices. I'm defined by the Lord. And he had my back, you know, and he fought my battles. He fought my battles during that season more than I can even count. You know, he opened doors for me that I thought that weren't going to be open, you know, and he took care of me. I was without, like, I literally never felt that I was lacking, you know, when I went from being set, right, quote unquote, to living on one income on like $12 an hour. And God provided in every single moment of my life. I faithfully still tithed. I faithfully, you know, served. And in the midst of that, like the Lord never forsake me, you know, and that's something that I want to kind of urge your listeners, like whoever's going through this, like God will not forsake us. Like God does not forsake, you know, his children, and he didn't forsake me. And honestly, that's what kept me going, knowing that when I felt alone, when I felt rejected, when I felt judged, that at the end of the day, it's really cliche to say, but only God can judge me, right? And he knew what happened behind closed doors, and I am who I am because of it. I feel like I'm a better wife because of it. I feel that I'm able to speak to women about it because I went through it. And it led me to my calling of advocacy, you know, because you don't go through what I go through and it not be for a reason. Like, you know, like, not that it makes it okay, you know, God doesn't want those terrible things to happen, but God works all the things for the good. And so the abuse, the domestic violence, the divorce, I have seen how God has used it for his glory. He has used it to help someone else get out of a bad situation, you know? So at the end, it's good.
Wow. Honestly, I got chills like while you were talking, because that's such a true statement that you said, that it's like, and like as cliche is, it's not cliche because I feel like it's the truth. It's like, you know, your story. And I feel like the only one that defines who we are is Christ, you know, and what you went through. You know, at this point, divorce is real, no matter if you want to make it spiritual, that, you know, the church says so. Divorce happens, and, you know, most people in church at this point have half of the church probably has been through it. So this is a topic that needs to be talked about, you know, and you know, I'm glad that you have been able then to share of, you know, your story in a way to help others, which is hard to do. And you don't ever think that while you're going through, you're going to eventually share it. So, you know, how has that been now, being married and having, you know, have you been able to work through to the relationship that you have today?
100%. I think that when you go through something like that, you're a lot more self-aware and you know yourself. Like, if you didn't know yourself in the first one, you'll definitely know yourself by the second. And I was very honest and transparent about my baggage, because the reality is we all have it, right? And so I was honest about the things that I was still working through. I was honest about my triggers. I had to, you know, let my now husband know, like, there's certain things that I don't feel comfortable with you doing because it reminds me of this situation. You know, I had to be very honest on why certain actions made me feel a certain way. And I also had to be very intentional about not blaming him for what someone else did. Because the reality is, we always, if we don't heal from it, we'll bring it to our next relationship. And, you know, something that my pastor says is, you know, forgiveness comes from confessing to Christ, but healing comes from confessing to others. And for me, if I couldn't be honest with my partner, then you weren't the one for me. And that might not be the case for everybody, because I know I've heard it said before, not everyone needs to know everything about you. But because of who I am and what I need in a relationship, I needed to be honest. And based on your reaction was going to determine whether this was going to move forward or not. And so when I told my now husband, about my child abuse, when I told my husband about how many partners I've had, like all those things, like I never felt judged by him. He has never thrown it in my face, like I felt safe. And that I needed that. And I feel like God knew that I needed that in a relationship in order to move forward. And so for me, communicate. I communicate my feelings. I communicate if something is bothering me. We've gone to marriage counseling, obviously I believe what the word of God says when it comes to marriage. I read a lot of books on marriage. I read a lot of books about parenting, I have to be very intentional, because my tendency, right, the environment, right, that I was born into is not that way. So I have to be more intentional about not repeating the same behavior. So that's how we deal with it in our relationship now, that if something is bothering us, like he knows I'm not going to let it fester. Like,
yeah,
and it's hard because he's not like that. My husband is he's the yin to my yang. So while I have to talk through it, he doesn't. He has to kind of process it on his own. And so also respecting that that's how he is. And that came from a lot of years. I'm not going to tell you that. So I would encourage anyone who has been divorced and is like considering getting remarried to do the hard work now. Because it's hard to do the hard work when you're in it, because now you're not worrying just about your mess, but you're also worrying about someone else's mess. And so do the hard work now, read the books now, do the counseling now. Because then you will know what you need from your partner and you'll be able to communicate that, instead of kind of learning as you go and your partner being like, what? I wasn't prepared for that. Like, I'm totally blindsided by this. Like, this is not who I dated,
Yeah.
Because we want to get the ring, right? So we act like, like we good,
And then after all this stuff starts coming out and you're like, oh, this is it. This is it. But like something that you shared with me before is that you were at a much different state because you were honest from the get-go versus, your first relationship, which I feel like came from you doing the work and also you figuring out what you needed. Because until we give ourselves a voice and until we tell ourselves what our needs are and what we know, then we're able to have like honest and vulnerable and transparent relationships. Because if we're just trying to please someone else, or we're just trying to, okay, you like that, then I like that. Yeah, that's fine. You talk to me like that. Or like you start stuffing things down because you don't want to start a fight. I feel like you're not being your true self. So it's like until you discover that, which sometimes takes time, then you're able to then fully be yourself and be like, this is me, you know what I mean? And yes, I'm not perfect, but like, this is me, how it is, at least right now, improvements
exactly.
can be made. Improvements can be made.
Exactly. Well, and I mean, we change every 7 years. So like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Evolve as people, right? And that's why I always encourage like people who are married, like you should go to therapy at least 6 sessions every year, just kind of like, because you change every year. So like, okay, are we on the same page on this? Are we on the same, especially if you're like, okay, now I'm thinking about having kids. Go to a therapist, talk about that, because now we got to talk. Okay, so what was your childhood like versus my childhood like? Because that's how we parent. And so that's something that in our relationship, we've had to do at 100 miles an hour because our story is not typical. And that's for another time. But, because of that, we have to be very vigilant about what our triggers are and what we come from. And so he knew my family, he knew what I came from, and he comes from a home where like parents have been married for over 30 years versus I come from a broken home. So trying to mend those two worlds is not easy, but we're making it work. Is it a walk in the park? Absolutely not. If you're going into marriage to think that you're going to have like happily ever after, like, I'm sorry to tell you that that is not the case. You know, it's, you have someone walking along this journey with you, you know, and to help you when you're down. They can be like, you know, that encourager for you and vice versa, at least if it's healthy, right? That's what it's supposed to be. But it takes work. It takes a lot of work to be married, and you have to be willing to put in that work, because you go from, you know, worrying about self to worrying about somebody else. And a lot of times you have to die to self, right? To die to your pride. You have to die to, you know, your wants and needs sometimes, in order, because it's not worth losing the marriage for you to want. And in marriage, you're not always going to get what you want. That's just fact. Right. So it's coming into a good medium. And I feel like me and my husband, after 10 years, I feel like we're there. You know, some things that are not worth me like dying on the hill for. And the same for him. Like, he knows I'm an extrovert. I know he's an introvert, you know, like we know each other, you know, and so it works. And so with our daughters, like even at the age of 6 and 8, they are aware of it. Like we let them know what you want. You know, you don't have to get married. That's not a thing. Like that's not a requirement to a fulfilling life, you know, like those conversations with them, and we'll respect them in whatever they decide. But because of what we lived, you know.
Wow, that's good. I love how we ended up talking about also like generationally and just how you can kind of change those things in your own new relationships, because sometimes, we aren't raised with those tools or know about those things, but we can change that in our own family dynamics, which can take a lot of work, but it is possible. So thank you so much, Keycha, for being honest, vulnerable, sharing your story. Honestly, like I know that you encouraged and inspired someone today, someone that may be going through the same thing or has gone through what you've been through. So thank you so much for being transparent. And where can people connect with you, find you, if they want to talk to you about their story?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm on Instagram, Keycha's Logic. I have a blog called Living Above the Stigma, .wordpress.com. And I also have a YouTube channel, which sometimes has my daughters in there, you know, sharing their point of view. So definitely through my Instagram though, because then they can connect with me through Linktree. Like my blog, my Pinterest, my, you know, YouTube and everything like that. So like I mentioned earlier, you know, I'm passionate about mental health. I'm passionate about like kind of, for me, it's like living above the stigma. So even if, you know, you're listening and you've been stigmatized for being divorced or whatever it may be, like you can live above that. Like you don't have to be defined by that. I am not defined by my divorce. You know, I am not defined by what happened to me. I am defined by God. And so that's what really I talk about in all my, you know, all the things that I do in my YouTube and in my blog and everything like that. And on my Instagram on Devotional Mondays is about that. It's like, how can we grow from this, right? And my hope. So whoever's listening, I pray that some part of my story you can connect with and know that I promise you, like, I'm a living testimony that you can have a very fulfilling life. You can have a great life even after a divorce.
Wow. So good. Thank you so much, Keycha. And thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode. It was amazing. So thank you again.
Thank you.